Funziona? Sì. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome again to our workshop area in this exhibition. We go on today with the program of the presentation of our delegation that accepted the invitation from Italian Trade Agency and Restauro to visit this restoration exhibition. Today we have in program actually seven presentations. We start with the United States of America, then we have Israel, Jordan, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Saudi Arabia, and Cuba. These are the presentations that we're going to watch today. I hope you'll find them interesting and a good completion to what we had yesterday. For the first, so we start, I'm going to introduce the first presentation, then unfortunately I'll have to leave the exhibition because I have to come back in Rome this afternoon, but my colleagues will go on moderating the presentation. So please, let's start with the presentation from the United States of America, please.
I have, yeah. Hello, yes. We'll wait 1 minute for the show to come up. Is this speaker working? I don't know. It's okay. Can you hear both? Okay, good. Okay, I will begin. Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Michael Patrick. I'm from the United States, and my colleagues Sarah and Lena will also be joining me today in presenting, also from the United States and from Canada, so we represent North America today. And I wanted to begin, as many have, by saying a very big thank you to Restauro and also ITA. It's been a wonderful trip, and the opportunity to be with the beautiful people from these 13 countries is probably one of the biggest memories that we'll take back with us. Not just the buildings, but really the people that we've met here today. I also want to briefly thank the Association for Preservation Technology in the United States, which is the group that sent us. All of us are members of that. This is an organization somewhat similar to Restauro in terms of bringing these kind of professionals together. So, let's see here. It worked, yay. Okay. Many people have asked us, is there a single agency responsible for conservation in the United States? Who regulates it? And I've often said, well, yes and no. And I thought maybe it would be useful to talk about the country just a little bit in background to explain that. In size, the United States is the third largest country in terms of landmass and also in terms of population in the world. So, for example, Italy, which is a country that I love very dearly, is approximately half of the size of Texas. So geographically, it's very diverse, and the economies also are quite large. So California has an economy approximately equal to France. So when we talk about there being a central agency, yes, our Department of the Interior does regulate conservation, but it's highly delegated to the states. We have 50 states, and each one has its own state historic preservation office. So that's the first thing I just wanted to say. So that's why, in some sense, we have a much more distributed system of conservation. The next thing I wanted to talk about very briefly is the diversity of climate and of ecology in the country. So we have everything from very warm and humid. This is about 90 miles from Cuba, so we're very far south here. And there are a few trees, but not so much trees in Florida, all the way up to Maine in the upper corner, which is on the border of Canada, which is basically, Maine is, the rivers are frozen about half of the year, and it's quite a cold climate with many trees and mountains, which eventually became a place to quarry stone. So all of this part of the country actually is very temperate, has large forests, and a big availability of wood. So when people from Europe first came here, many of our buildings are constructed out of wood because it's what they had, and they couldn't get the stone right away. Whereas in New England, fairly quickly, up in the north, they began to quarry stone and to use that material because it was available. And then here we have, again, hot because toward the south, but very arid. There are areas here that are completely desert, absolutely desert. and some of the adobe architecture made of mud bricks, which baked in the sun, are from here. So there's a very wide range that lead to the different kinds of architecture that we have. The last thing I wanted to just use this map for briefly is to say that the original peoples, the American Indian peoples, came across I can't reach that high, but they came across the Bering Strait way up across the top probably 15 or 20,000 years ago, and they spread all across North America into what's now Canada, into the United States, etc. And their architecture again reflected the adobe, for example. This is in Colorado, so this is in the west where it is quite arid and can get quite warm. And that architecture reflected where they landed, whereas the Indians over on the east coast would use wood, or in the Great Plains where there were large animals, they would use wood and a combination of the skins from the animals to make their architecture. The people who came from Europe later brought their architecture with them. And actually, if this works, I'll back up for just a second. So the Spanish largely originally settled in the Florida area, also came, of course, to this part of California. As you move up the coast, this was more people from England, and then this is all very roughly speaking, of course. It's not quite this clean, but German and Dutch more up toward New York, and then French more up toward Canada and that area. And that remains to this day somewhat the case. Also, when these land grants were given, when people said that they could have the land, which of course is a complicated question, but they were told they could have the land and they came and took the land. They were given a grant that extended westward across the country. So the German influence and Dutch that ended up in New York ends up spread across the country, and that's why you find German-influenced architecture, for example, right in the middle in the north, because those people spread always just due westward. So this is one of the trends that happens when we look at the styles in American architecture. Let's see. So just to go forward again. So you would see Spanish, in the United States, Spanish-inspired architecture, French, or in this case, a kind of a combination of French and Spanish, English, Georgian, federal architecture. This is in Boston, so in an area that became settled by the English. And then across the land, you see often northern European-inspired vernacular architecture, sometimes very simple and very beautiful. Also, we had and have a lot of land. There's room to build a lot. So all the new styles that come along, a great deal of architecture is built. When the Victorian era came, I don't think this works on the screen, but when the Victorian era came, this is in San Francisco, vast parts of the country were built in this Victorian architecture. And that Victorian age was a great eclectic age where you had a little Italian in it, and you had some Greek revival, and all the revivals came along. So that spread across the country. And of course, the modern architecture, this is the Chrysler Building, is now part of our modern heritage. So there's a great deal that we do in the United States now to preserve heritage this 20th century, not even the older here, and industrial heritage. So these have character-defining features that are important for our heritage as well. So I'm going to give you a brief history of conservation and the laws that govern our country before I hand it off to my colleagues. These are, so even in the early parts of the European settlement, late 1600s and 1700s, there was a vibrant conversation going on. Am I too loud or too soft? Okay. A vibrant conversation going on about whether to preserve the culture. Even as people moved westward and they moved the Indians out, a tragic thing that happened, they were trying maybe to consider preserving some of the earthworks that they left behind. So there's irony, a very deep irony there, but that was being considered, as well as the earlier colonial buildings. Already they were saying, well, this is a part of our past we may want to preserve, but this collided with the very American experience, I think for us almost alone in this in our continent, of the many people came to the country wanting no longer to be under a kind of an overarching centralized government form, and so private enterprise and private energy is a big part of the energy of our country. So from the beginning, there's been a kind of a tension between the two. This all came to a head in 1850. This house on the right is the historic home of George Washington. This is called Mount Vernon. This was George Washington was, of course, the military general who led our Revolutionary War, leading to our being an independent country, and also the first president of the United States. also making history when he stepped down peacefully for a peaceful progression of power to the next there. This was the house of John Hancock, who was the first signer of the Declaration of Independence. 1850s, both are approached by private investors who want to tear them down. And this one was saved, this one was not, and the stories are interesting, both totally private. At this point, there's no public, there's no federal intervention in this way at all. This was actually, money was raised by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. I live about 5 miles from here on one of Washington's farms, and it still owns the property today. I'm on the board there, and we raise money to try to maintain the building. And it's maintained absolutely, it's being renovated right now to federal standards, but all the funding is private funding. A huge outcry went up, save the building, but the brother of John Hancock said, oh yes, I'll save the building, I'll save the building. And so they sort of lost focus for a minute, and one day they came and it was torn down. And he said, I'm saving his building. I'm building a nicer house there to honor him. So he had a different idea of conservation. He wanted to save the idea, but not the building. So that caused a lot of consternation in the United States. I'm sorry. So then, this is actually 1950s that these happened. This also started 1850s. This also started a movement in the United States that was mostly local to create historic districts in the 1950s. Then in the 1960s, a similar thing happened on a larger scale. Penn Station, which was a beautiful train station in New York City, was slated for destruction. Efforts were made to stop it, and they failed. And now a really unsatisfactory building is there that no one loves in place of a building that would have been really beautiful. Then a similar proposal was made. This is Grand Central Station. Anyone who's been to New York and you've been in beautiful Grand Central Station, they were going to either tear it down or put a huge building on top of it. And that's when everybody said enough is enough. And that sponsored the 1966 National Historic Preservation Act. So if someone asks, what's the regulation or law that governs conservation in our country? It's this act. And it did a couple of things. It established all these registers of historic places. It also established the National Park Service as a very important organization that would create a lot of the documents and standards that move forward. Through that, it did create the standards that we use today, that are augmented what we use today. And it also created these state historic preservation offices. Offices. So that's when I say, is there an overarching regulation? Yes. It's the Department of the Interior, which is the part of our government that actually regulates it. Through the National Park Service, they create standards that everyone has to conform to. But the actual implementation of that is done on a state-by-state basis through the State Historic Preservation Office and the officer and their team. So that's how that works. There are many different kinds of, both individual buildings can be registered and districts, landscapes, archaeological sites. This kind of leads to the picture that in the United States it's very complex. We have about only 27 buildings that are on what's called the National Trust, Historic Trust, which are publicly people visit them all the time, and they're part of our national heritage. We have about 2,500 buildings, 2,500 that are landmark buildings and heavily protected. We have about 95,000 that are on the list of historic places, which are also regulated, but not quite as tightly. And there are about 1.5 million buildings inside historic districts that are also regulated, often for characteristic features that can be seen from public view. So often when you're working in the United States and in those districts, maybe in that case it's more the facade or what you can see and not what's inside, whereas a landmark building, everything about it would be protected. So I think that's everything I have to say. One more? Let's go here. Yeah. So this is the National Park Service I mentioned, and then the State Historic Preservation Office. And there are, like where I live in Alexandria, Virginia, there's a Board of Architectural Review that locally reviews all the architecture, as well as there might be a national easement. So the thing to do, if you want to work in the United States or approach a project that way, is to find someone locally who knows what's going on, or research the federal documents, but also you really need to research each property and see what easement it might be under, what the regulation locally is, what the regulation nationally is. And I did want to mention again our organization, the APT. The reason I do is because it's filled with professionals who do this, and so you might find someone there who can really help you navigate that landscape. So thank you for my part, and I'll hand it off to Sarah here.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Okay, so Michael just talked to all of you about how the preservation system works in America. I want to tell you how these projects actually get funded, so who's paying and what are we doing with all these different entities. So we have privately funded projects that would be owners, or we also have state-run projects and federal projects. The federal project would come generally through the General Services for the American People. So they would regulate that contract and all the specific requirements for the project and the building that falls under. We also have, within these three contract types, we have the residential, so apartment buildings, condos. We also have commercial. We have industrial. There's quite a few historic properties in America from the turn of the century where we have stone, terracotta, brick, just really beautiful buildings. And what they were doing was, as technologies were changing, they wanted to highlight that, especially with power, with electricity. There's one building in New York that actually has, from Thomas Edison, created the light bulb, and he has light bulbs in all of the cast iron window surrounds, and so that's one of our big landmarks in New York. We also have infrastructure, heavy construction. We have a lot of historic bridges that fall under this jurisdiction. One, for instance, is the Brooklyn Bridge. It was the first suspension bridge. We have contemporary additions. So within that, we have a lot of times they do this with museums or residential houses where they're putting, you have this historic building, but they're adding a modern structure in addition to it that often complements the structure, but it's modern. You know it's there. It's not trying to replicate the historic building. It's not copying what's there. We also have heritage interiors. So not always is the entire building landmarked or on the National Register in the United States. I'm not sure if that's how it is for all of you, but sometimes we only have the facade, and that allows the owner to do whatever they want on the interior. For specific properties, it will actually, the interior spaces will have a specific designation for the landmark, and that protects all the historic materials and the artistic work inside of there. Okay, so types of projects that are going on in the United States right now. We have asset repositioning. So you're taking the building from what it once was built for, or what that current use is, and you're either improving it for sustainability reasons, making it more modern, or you're actually transitioning the use. So the photo that I've shown here, this is the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. And you may know it. A lot of past presidents and current presidents from the United States have stayed there, also delegates from other countries when they're coming in for the UN. But right now, it is the largest asset repositioning job going on in the United States. They're converting the structure from completely being a hotel and turning it into partially hotel, partially apartments and condominiums. It is an Art Deco, very tall building. It's 1.2 million square feet. I'm sorry, I don't know that in meters. But it also, the exterior is a National Historic Landmark, and the interior has certain spaces that are landmarked as well. So on the exterior right now, what they're doing is facade repairs. They're cleaning, they are repointing, they're doing Dutchman, they are restoring some of these beautiful cast aluminum panels that you'll find along the facade. Okay, we also have building envelope, stabilizing the building envelope. This is probably a big one, and I'm just going to group ongoing maintenance in here because similar to many of you, water is always the culprit. So we don't want water coming in the building because that just further deteriorates our historic spaces. And so we do a lot of work to make the exterior building watertight. We do a lot of waterproofing. And then we also don't want to lose the efficiency of our heating and cooling systems on the interior as well, because energy is expensive, and so we want our buildings to operate as well as they can. Okay. And then we also have restoration projects. So this is where we'll do a full-scale restoration of the building to bring it back to the period of significance that it has been determined to be. So something in the United States is when we say restoration, what we're actually talking about is we have said that at this point in time, maybe this building has gone through several additions, and they could be from 1800, 1850, 1900, and have all these different time periods of construction. But if the period of significance of this building was 1850, then it goes back to that time, that 1850, what it looked like. So in this project that's shown, this is Mount Vernon, and this is actually one of Michael's projects. So if you have any questions, talk to him later. But we're cleaning the woodwork. We are also reglazing the windows. The lower left-hand photo is actually a sand casting method. It's not stone. And George Washington himself actually picked out the level of sand that went into that cornice. So that's something really special that, as Americans, we want to preserve. They're also mapping the nails that are on the carpentry below that, and then doing some select repairs to that as well, and then doing a door restoration. Okay. I want to take us back to when Michael showed the graph or the map of the United States and all of the different climates that we endure in the states. So we have some natural disasters that have occurred over the last couple of years and over time, and we have hurricanes on the northeast, well, stretching from the southeast up to the northeast, that bring a lot of wind, a lot of water. In the middle of America, we have tornadoes that cause a lot of damage to our structures, where they create a lot of wind and destroy the property. And then on the west coast, we're undergoing some pretty intense wildfires that are burning down a lot of our cultural resources, and it's a problem that we're dealing with on the other side of the country from me. But the pictures that I've shown here are the top right-hand corner is New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. We had several buildings in the French Quarter that were damaged, and also not only in Louisiana, it stretched out to Alabama, which is a nearby state, Mississippi, and caused just major flooding in the area and having to rebuild these areas. Also, just a trend that we're seeing right now through some government projects is waterproofing plazas of buildings, and so that we take up the plaza, waterproof all around the building to make sure that we don't have significant amounts of water coming in and damaging the systems for the building, or just causing more deterioration with large amounts of water. Okay, so who are all the people that are doing these projects? We have architects and engineers designing. We have conservators that are doing the documentation, doing the testing to determine what the job requirements will be to help out with the architects and the engineers. And then we have the contractors and the craftspeople that are executing this work. And so, as Michael said, we are delegates of the Association for Preservation Technology, and this is a place where all of these different entities come together to speak and to share ideas. And on that, I will pass this over to Lena. Thank you.
So we're not really an American delegation. We're really a delegation from North American and APT. We all three sit on the board of APT. I'm vice president. Sarah is at chapters, and Michael is at outreach. I'm also on the publication committee. So I'm going to just take a few minutes to introduce APT. So our mission statement is to advance appropriate traditional and new technologies to care for, protect, and promote the longevity of the built environment and to cultivate the exchange of knowledge throughout the international community. We spent really months trying to find that definition. So who's an APT? I'm not going to read the whole list, but basically it's anybody who cares about built heritage in a professional manner. So not people that like their home, but really architects, engineer, conservator, contractor, and the likes. How do we achieve our mission? It's largely through, it's a twofold mission. It's about knowledge of the buildings, knowledge of the technology. So we have publication, we have committees. There's a bunch of technical committees of which APT members can just be part of. They meet on a regular basis. They talk about the issues at hand. They do organize events. They do organize trainings. They do publish written material. They do webinars. So this is one important way to learn about it. We also have publications. We have the APT Bulletin, which is a magazine that's published 3 times a year, in which you have technical articles that are peer-reviewed. So really higher level, really technical, talking about all the subtleties of the work we do. We have the communique, which is more about member news, that's less technical. Practice points, which are articles that talk, let's say, about masonry cleaning in a general manner or wood in a general manner that try to get together all the large principles of a subject. And we're currently in the process of updating them. Some of them are a bit old and outdated, so we're into that. And, the Building Technology Library, basically that's a collection of documents of trade magazines, of, the kind of documents they're handing out at events such as this that are being scanned, put on the internet. You can access this for free even if you're not a member. So if you want to see like catalogs of plaster moldings in the 1850s, you just go on, type that in, and you'll see it. Like concrete, housing from the 60s, terracotta, you name it, it's all there. So that's an ongoing program. We have an intern every summer spending the summer scanning the material, putting it online. So it's really hours of fun to navigate that. We have OSCAR, which I keep on forgetting exactly what the acronym is for, but it's about sustainable architecture in the field of preservation. So they meet on a regular basis to build that database, and it's basically the result of discussion of which projects are more sustainable, how the fact that existing buildings tend to be more sustainable than building a new building from scratch. And we also have the annual conference, which is our main event. So that's every year in the fall. And this is where maybe the twofold mission of APT comes best together, where there's this technical lecture about everything, you name it, about conservation, but there's also a lot of talking, lots of drinking, lots of meeting, and it's really about building ties. Because, preservation is such a large field that there's no way you're going to know it all, but you can at least meet people that know the parts you don't know. So since you build friendships, since you build relation, then you can really get to those people later in the year and just call them when you have those questions that just come up once in a while and that nobody really knows about, but then you call the wood expert and he'll know. And, maybe just go back. And here you have pictures of an event that organized APT Quebec from Canada and APT South and Northeast in the United States. So it was a joint event on the border. We visited that library that sits right on the Canadian-American border, visited that quarry that's not too far. And it's really this notion that we get together to discuss this thing. This is about people, maybe more about crew knowledge. And of course, so what I told was basically about APT International, so the central body, but we also have chapters that are local to regions. Most of them are in the United States. We have a few in Canada. We have a huge one in South America. We have APT Europe. I don't know if Andrew is still there. He's co-chairing APT Europe. And we have one in Southeast Asia that's largely focused on India. And we have the Oceania one that's largely focused on Australia. So they basically do the same kind of stuff than APT, but it's a more local region. So you have events that are more local, focusing on whatever is important to a region or We also try to go into more languages. Like I've been co-chairing APT Quebec for a long time, and we do present that kind of information, but in French. So that's what it is. If you have any question, please feel free to ask me. We're really happy to promote this, and we're having lots of fun with it. Thank you.